Hello, welcome to the 66 playtest. Where tonight we're not actually doing a playtest, but we're actually going to be discussing certain rules in my setting, 66 Lovecraft. Now, it came to our attention last week, if anyone at home was watching the playtest there, that the stress mechanics were a little unbalanced. By a little, I mean that one character wound up with over 20 points of stress and one wound up with 2. After experiencing the same situations. So we went away, thought that was a bit unbalanced. We had a bit of a chat about it, and now we're going to be discussing how we can get past that problem. Also, we're going to be discussing how monsters can affect your character's mental well-being, because previously they were tied into the old trauma mechanics fairly tightly. Now, Chris, you had, well, we discussed on Wednesday, but I thought you might like to talk about it. You seem to have some good ideas then, or I can go over it up to you.
Yes, yeah. The way we've sort of done it so far is that when it's sort of stress or insanity, whatever you want to call it, it works like damage. You encounter something horrible, you make resistance against it, and if you fail it, you acquire a certain amount of stress. And this leads to this imbalance because not everyone is as good as other people at defending against it. So one of the thoughts Pat and I had out of our discussion was that actually making it more like we handle character development, because we don't have experience points as such in 66 RPG. What happens is you get 1 point per hour of play. So points allow you to buy extra advantages and things, and if you think of a 4-hour session, that's pretty much enough to buy you either a basic advantage or expand an existing advantage. So as the character gets played, it grows and develops and things like that. And it's nothing to do particularly about what the character does, it's just that the player has played the character. So it occurred to me that we could handle the stress, horror, insanity mechanic in a similar way, rather than sort of making it the game mechanic like you take damage or whatever. You just say that, yeah, as you play this character, it's going to degrade, and the longer you play it, the faster the more it will degrade and go madder and madder, and which has the advantage that it's predictable, the GM can control it, and also that it reflects more closely what happens in the stories of Lovecraft, which is characters degrade over time. You'd rarely get that situation where a monster pops up and a Lovecraft character suddenly goes, "Oh my god," and runs away screaming. It tends to be more gradual than that. So that's sort of like where Pat and I left it on Wednesday. That about sums it up, doesn't it, Pat?
Yeah. Sorry, it was when you were talking, it occurred to me I hadn't actually said what the old stress mechanics were before saying we needed to change them, so thank you for that. Yeah, we had this idea of this humanization, dehumanization mechanic. We couldn't really think of a name for it. I've gone with alienation because I quite like it. It's not a word you encounter a lot in Lovecraft, but I think it speaks to a very Lovecraftian kind of idea. And what's important is what we were kind of doing before was kind of ticking the boxes. And as a fan of Lovecraft, I've seen this a lot. You go to something and it goes, oh, it's Lovecraftian. And what that means is they'll mention Cthulhu, they'll mention Nyarlathotep, somebody will at some point say Cthulhu Fhtagn, and then somebody will go mad. And that's not the essence of Lovecraft. That's the style of Lovecraft. That's the set dressing, if you will. And there are some really great Lovecraftian things which mention none of those things, like a really good if you're looking for a bit of unexpected Lovecraftianness, Ghostbusters 2, bizarrely enough, because of the kind of the way that everything is underneath the city and nobody really knows it's there and it's all kind of creeping around, is actually quite Lovecraftian. So something more like that. So I've gone for this alienation mechanic. Now, the way that this mechanic basically works is every player character in 66 Lovecraft has this ability, this alienation ability. and whatever the value of that ability is applied against you in certain roles. Now, those roles would be roles where a character who is starting to become irate or depressed or just a little bit on edge would would be affected by that. So social interaction would be one. Not so much combat, because that's more based on kind of adrenaline responses and instinctive things, but certainly social interaction, interrogations, that kind of thing. Actually, I'd be interested in if you guys could suggest any other situations where that might come up. I can put a list down on those.
Okay, so just to get it straight in my own head, as you play 66 Lovecraft, you essentially get alienation points.
Yes, that's right. It would basically be unavoidable as long as you're encountering Lovecraftian monsters.
Okay,
Now,
so as time
sorry.
ticks on, so I've played a character for a session, I've got 3 alienation points. That means I've got a 0 plus d6, or a 0 d6 plus 3
Yes.
alienation hazard to all my actions.
Yeah, that would be right.
Yeah, okay, and that just gently ticks up over time.
But would 3 points be d6? Would be 0 d6 plus 2. I've never quite.
3.
It would be
Yeah.
3.
And then 4 points is a 1d6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then it goes it doodles on from there. Okay, that's. I think that will work. I think it gives you the requisite slow trickle that you want. So you think basically interaction, if you've got alienation or I think alienation works quite well rather as a name, rather than say madness, because that's just a bit too specific, I think.
It's like I was saying, it's a keyword, it's a buzzword, a tick box, and
So interactions with Eldritch Abominations, definitely. Social actions, definitely. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, you don't want to have it blanketing everything. And the only concern I would have is the tick rate or the increase rate would need to be very carefully managed. You could get in the situation whereby, last week was a good example in that I had a character with a significant bunch of social skills who could shrug off a 1d6 plus 3 to negative social interaction quite easily. Chris's character would be near crippled by that.
But I think that's the. There's two questions. The speed you sort of get worse at, I think the GM can set it. So if you only know they're playing for 3 sessions, he can sort of put his foot on the gas and you go away very quickly. If you know you're doing a long campaign with the same characters, you can make it a lot slower. But I don't think there's a fundamental problem in saying that my character would actually be handicapped worse than yours with the same value. Because that sort of fits with my character. My character is relatively poor socially to start off with. I'm going to become more and more withdrawn. It's going to be more obvious or more impactful than me. Just in the same way, if you are a combat-orientated character, you could probably set up to take more damage without being seriously handicapped than a non-combat character would.
Yeah, we don't want to delineate the value of those soul cards by making them basically just more life cards. They have a purpose. So.
Yeah, I think one of the key things here is that you're right about when this is going to come into play, and I quite like the idea that that actually is not just negative. That there are situations where it's positive, so it helps you. If you're going down the route to becoming a cultist and summoning creatures, actually this alienation should help you, and you should be able to use it as an advantage to your own benefit. But also the flip side is that makes you less capable of existing in normal society.
Yeah, it makes sense that your knowledge.
Don't talk when you're talking.
I was just making note of what you just said. It would make sense that your knowledge of kind of the greater truths of the universe might make you a little bit better at manipulating those said elements. So if your character has like a +3 alienation card, then yes, it will affect them when they're in social interactions or in interactions where you're trying to avoid monsters or things like that. But it would make you better at, say, casting a summoning spell, or reading the Necronomicon or something like that. If you get me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely convinced by the name alienation, because I think that sort of like works well in describing the negative impact in how you deal with society, but I'm not sure it sort of puts across the positive aspect of it makes you better at dealing with the alien monsters.
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky one. We don't. I mean, alienation is more the concept we want rather than just madness.
Yeah, it's just that you're disconnected. As you become aware of the greater universe, you become disconnected, less connected with the common idea of the universe, and more connected with the mythos.
How about inhumanity?
Yeah, that works quite well.
Because I mean, the thing is, I might do more with this. As I was explaining to you the other day, Chris, I should explain this to the listeners. There's a thing in Lovecraft that almost, certainly in the stories that we've been looking at, happens a lot more than people just going blib 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 blib, going mad, and that is them becoming something not entirely human. For example, the narrator of The Whisper in Darkness, Henry Akeley in The Whisper in Darkness becomes a brain in a jar. The unnamed narrator of A Shadow over Innsmouth finds out that he's related to the residents of Innsmouth and eventually starts turning into one of them. In The Colour Out of Space, the people living on the farmhouse become feral kind of creatures, like half humans, and so it could be used as well as a mechanic towards a kind of transformative thing. If something was happening in your campaign which meant that one of your characters was doing something like that you've got a guy who was turning into something that he wasn't originally, that his inhumanity could be used towards that as well.
That's an interesting thought, because one of the problems when we discussed this the other night is that how do you reward individual players? If you just, for a character who just sits in the car waiting for the other characters to come out of a haunted house, how do they get a different, level of points from those who go into the house and rummaging around in the corpses? Because it doesn't make narrative sense that they both at the same rate. So what we could have is that, in addition to this inhumanity or alienation, we have specific transformative things that the characters develop, and so that everyone gets the inhumanity at the same rate, but maybe some characters get the become feral effect as well, and they acquire points in that if they behave more inhuman.
You could, so you get inhumanity points, and you have a choice at the end of an adventure. Do you want to spend them on a hazard advantage, which could be picked from a list? So it could be going slightly more feral, it could be descending into more madness, it could be some kind of social tick, or you get the choice of no, you can carry on accruing them, but when you do get to 25, you're going to have to spend them in one long go.
Yeah.
Oh, but player choice, there's an interesting concept. I mean, we could just have an entire path of, that all characters have this. And like experience points that players or character points that players get to spend on their own advantages, you get these alienation points. And they have to spend them and accrue them and spend them in the same way. And so that player can choose to a certain extent how they are affected by.
So inhumanity becomes a path, not a hazard.
Yeah, and Well, but they basically choose their own hazards. So alienation would be one of those hazards they can choose. Turning into a brain in the jar, a physical transformation might be another one of the paths. We can even slap in some just straightforward insanity on there as well.
I would run it so that you basically you start off with no alienate, you start off with no inhumanity, and when you get to 4, you basically buy the path.
That's not a bad idea. I like that. It's going a bit more back towards what we were doing originally, anyway, though. But
yeah, which wasn't wrong. The problem was the rate of accrual rather than necessarily quite the effects.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're talking about it like it's everybody gets the same week in, week out, and I don't think that would be the case. I think it wouldn't be a large differential. It would only be like the difference between 1 point and 2 points, maybe. But characters who did less well in kind of situations, who freaked out a bit more or things like that, might get one more than somebody who didn't. So, for example, in last week's session, Jay's character spent a lot of time being very kind of stoic and not really getting affected by anything, whereas Chris's character kind of got very, very wibbly very quickly. I don't think there shouldn't be some kind of differential for a character who has had a bit more of a bad experience than one who has. But yeah, a slight difference is things. But then we could also put things like put positives into the alienation advantage, into the alienation path, like for example, the summoning spells or Lovecraftian spells or occult knowledge, so like a meta occult knowledge, like real occult knowledge rather than learned from books kind of thing.
Yeah, the Cthulhu mythos, and classically they call it Cthulhu.
And those things in turn would delineate, using them would give you another point of alienation. So it's like, oh, it's good, I can use it, but using it all the time is not a good idea, kind of thing.
Yeah. The only thing, the idea I just thought we just worked through there was the players basically, if they're just accruing experience points, AP, the players can build a bank of it up and then spend it as and when they choose. Now, in this version, they get to 4 inhumanity, and they get the inhumanity path, which I think almost you could describe it as maybe an awful lot of them have got red borders. It's almost a hazard path. Now, I don't know if we have that as a concept yet, but it's something we could potentially explore. But after that, we're essentially saying to the players, you get to choose your madness. Now, what happens if I say, I'm just going to let these inhumanity points accrue?
Well, you'll always have the negatives against your standard rolls.
Well, no, because if you think about how character points work, you can be awarded 3, 4, 5 character points and choose not to spend them because next week you want to bank them up for something big.
Yeah.
So that's a valid criticism, because then a player can do the alienation point and say, well, I'm not going to spend any of them and avoid any negative.
I think
effects.
this is the thing. If you spend them, then maybe not. I like the idea that maybe whilst you're accruing them, they still work like we were talking about before. So if you've got 3 points of alienation, you're getting a -3 to your social rolls and your rolls to interact with things. As soon as you hit 4 points and buy that path, you don't have those points anymore because you spent them on that path. But then if you start accruing more and you go, oh, I don't want to take any more alienation abilities in this path, they'll just keep
Oh, I get it. I get what you mean, Pat. So if you've got the points in your bank, they basically account to you have inhumanity. It affects everything you do.
Well,
Whereas
not
if you
necessarily everything, but
if you spend them on cards in the inhumanity deck, then they only affect some actions.
yes, that would be.
Yes, so everyone, the character will have a set number of alienation points, but they might be they might be in this general path. It just goes into the path, or they might basically the character can rearrange where their points are spent from a general alienation to a specific negative effect, to be more characterful. So yeah, I quite like.
That gives you just sorry, Chris. Yeah, that gives you also an idea because you don't necessarily need to have one path for this. You could have a whole set of them. So you could have a alien transformation path. You could have an alienation path. You could have a cultist path, where they start to become very different from our standard D66 advantages in that they kick in as hazard cards as often as they kick in as useful cards.
Yes, I mean it's written in the rules that a hazard can be played as a standard advantage. To take, for example, being on fire. There are situations where you could spend the potential and use the fact you're on fire to advantage, such as like bear hugging an opponent. The fact you're on fire actually becomes useful to you. So being stark raving mad might be a hazard most of the time, but there might be situations where actually it's quite handy.
So in terms of your development there, Pat, you can dip into whether or not you want the idea of having several paths of where you basically describe your character's descent from humanity to something else, or you can just keep it tidy with just one path, and each advantage in it represents their progress along that particular type of it.
Yes, I like this. I like what's come out of this. That's very clever.
The only thing I would say, if you go for the one path option, what you'll find is players dipping into. They'll basically just be they'll try to get to 4 and get rid of something, get to 4 and get rid of something. So you'll end up with a player who's got a little bit of all of the problems. Whereas if you make them pick from, say, a set of 6, and once they've picked that path, they have basically have spent however many, 10 by 25, 250 points on it before they can pick anything else. So once you picked an inhumanity path, you're stuck with that inhumanity path. You can't start picking another inhumanity path and going down that one.
I think Chris was going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Jay, you got the right idea. And to say, if you choose the becoming a deep one path, Sorry, Callie managed just to mute me. Thank you, Callie. Which gives you the character development thing in that that they're stuck on this path and they're getting worse and worse and worse. So I think there's a lot of idea, and I think we can play with the character sheet slightly here. I'm not worried about introducing. Obviously, these are slightly new mechanics. That's fine because they're going to work perfectly, be nice and self-enclosed to Lovecraft. But we can think about the character sheet design and have one column which is specifically assigned to your whatever you want to call it, the alienations or insanities.
Like we've got with the mundane equipment at the moment, where it's a little block at the bottom with just put the names here because this is what they're not going to really do anything. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the other question I had, because that's a lot to think about, a lot to do, and to be honest, I actually really like that idea. So I heavily playtest that next week, and we'll put that in if we're up for a Lovecraft playtest next week. The other thing was monsters, because if you look at the monsters for 66 Lovecraft, a lot of them have abilities which were designed using the old stress and trauma system to do that. And I don't really necessarily want to get rid of them. I just want to change the way they work, because I was thinking maybe do them more as old standard potential attacks. Like, I'll give the man himself, I'll put Cthulhu up. I'll put a link to Cthulhu in the chat bar there. And in fact, I'll just bring this up. I'll share my screen so anyone watching can see it. Just bring that up. How do I do a screen share?
I think it's the little icon with the camera. No, that's capture. It's the one with the arrow, green screen with the arrow. Okay,
so start screen share. Cool. So you can see that there. We've got this here. Cthulhu is the High Priest of the Great Old Ones. Has a dynamic potential of 8 SP. So if you're looking down here, there's 2 here in the middle row: Blasphemous and Divine Terror. And both of them have the keyword trauma. And the way that worked in the previous system is that those would trigger you to have to spend all of your remaining stress on a trauma hazard. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen anymore under this new system. You'll be choosing your trauma hazards yourself between adventures, or when you accrue the right amount of points. So, like, is there any other way we can make monsters like this big, scary monsters?
Here's an idea. No. Okay, if we were just using the original one, just using one path of inhumanity,
Yeah.
what these could do would basically, say, take blasphemous or no divine terror. If he successfully used that card against you, any inhumanity pool you had left would be automatically spent on the madness one. So basically, he would cause you to turn your stock of inhumanity, into a specific thing. In terms of what you're thinking here, trauma. So the original idea was basically he would force you to spend or force you to accrue a significant amount of trauma.
Yeah, well, if you remember the stress mechanics, the actual level of stress you had in the old system didn't do anything until you encountered something with one of these abilities.
Yeah.
And then it would be spent. But I think our new system works better because it's a gradual thing rather than the sudden blah, 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 blah. However, that said, I mean,
the one thing you could do it is have it so that it's like a status attack, status effect,
yeah,
and possibly just permanent. That especially something like Cthulhu, which is, let's face it, as big as they come. That actually you gain instantly, half a dozen alienation points, which you have to spend on a specific type of alienation relating to the Cthulhu. So you can be really nasty and force players just to add alienation points and spend them on specific things and tune that to specific monsters.
So they will actually give you a straight add of the points.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because that way, if your characters are all running around and one of you goes in the wrong cave and sees like Cthulhu, he's going to get a lot more alienation than somebody who doesn't, who just is going around in the spooky caves. Spooky cave guy gets maybe 1 or 2. Lovecraft guy who sees Cthulhu gets a whole load, because Cthulhu's there. Obviously, if he saw Cthulhu, his problems would be over very quickly. But as an example, that would be.
Yeah, and then obviously that would be a bit much for things like deep ones, or the sort of lesser creatures. I mean, but things like deep ones are really just going to be normal creatures. They're not going to have particular powers. They're the sort of things which your weekly increment of alienation points covers, doesn't it? Because they're sort of like the bottom rung.
Yeah.
But the middle level things, you could do the same thing as the Cthulhu, in that they force a status effect on someone. However, it could be temporary, more like just a straight status effect. So maybe, when you meet the King of Deep Ones or whatever else, you temporarily gain the sort of become partly Deep One advantage, but it maybe only lasts a week or a month or something like that. So you can play with the power levels of a monster by just tweaking the time period the effects have.
That makes sense. I think that's definitely something I'll try and get into the playtest next week. I'll put one of the kind of something like a MyGo or a Bioki, which has a couple of horror-causing cards, but nothing with like the D6+6 as you were seeing there with Cthulhu. And we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that makes sense.
The other way is, I think if you were sort of intimating against about sort of making it more like the sort of standard potential attacks and things like that, is you can almost treat it like magical abilities on monsters, so that a creature can have a fear attack, and if the players fail, they then have to run away. We get the fear status effect. And it's just a normal combat mechanic as any other monster. So not all the monsters have to use the same game mechanisms to have their fear effects.
True. I can see how, like, for example, I was just actually looking at it now. You probably saw, because I've still got the screen shared, the Night Gaunt. is actually very scary. It has Alien Form and Blasphemous, both of which have got quite high dice values. But that's whenever Night Gaunts kind of appear in the books, even though they are kind of things which are not exactly benign, but they are kind of friendly to people who know how to make them friendly. They are always a source of horror to the people who meet them because they have no faces and they're all rubbery and they do hideous things to people. Whereas Amigo, although they are scary, they're living out in the woods and they can talk to you, so they're not quite as alien, if you know what I mean. They're still very alien, but, you know, they have a motive, they have a recognizable kind of thing. Like Deep Ones are frogfish men who clearly have a motive. You know, they're coming up and they're interbreeding with humans, and although that's a bit weird, it's something you can recognize as a drive that creatures like yourself have.
Yes, I think whatever sort of thing you need to come up with, you need to have a palette of effects the monsters can have, which you can tune in tone and feel, as well as a sort of deadliness to fit the monster.
A lot of different cards of this type anyway. You can see there the Migo that actually has horrifying, which horrifying sounds thingy, but that sounds a lot worse than the Night Gaunt sounds a lot better than Blasphemous, for example.
Yeah.
Blasphemous will be something that really through your brain, whereas horrifying is horror.
Yeah. You understand fear because fear is something roller coasters give you fear, but you don't truly get something which fundamentally questions your belief in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I think we've got some good ideas there.
Yeah, I think we covered what we needed to cover. As I said, I'll put together a playtest next week which puts those elements to the fore. I'll probably spend my writing time this week actually writing those up as at least a dump set of rules. And I'll have those for you next Wednesday, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd keep it simple. I mean, we've got those two characters, so I mean, I'd give them maybe slightly different points, and just the core thing we need to start off with, because we're only going to not have many points in those characters yet, is get that core alienation advantage down, and then that will sort of like build up, because the actual mechanism of how you gain them and things like that, it's actually quite simple and won't need much writing out, and it doesn't really come into the playtest. The key thing is think about that core alienation and a monster with an effect, so which we can try out.
I'll put those new paths in a new subchapter as well, so that's sorted. But yes, that makes sense. I'll put in one of the I'll put in a monster, so we've got that. I'm not trying to be as clever as All right then.
And on that note, that would neatly drop into a 66 think tank.
Yes, it would.
So we basically come up with, imagine, say, what do we want? 6 paths of inhumanity, ways that you can become more inhuman over the course of the Lovecraftian style game. We want 9 advantages for each of them. Yeah,
that'll be a great think tank. So yeah, in a couple of weeks' time, once we're sort of confident of the mechanics, we'll do that as a think tank.
Make a note of that.
That's how it all works. I'll clock it. I'll put it on my notes.
And this is broadcast on YouTube, Pat, so if you forget any of it, you can always go back and just rewatch it.
Exactly, yeah, I can do that. All right, well, thank you all for watching at home. I think I'm quite happy with what we've come through here today. If anybody has any suggestions for us, I mean, we do the think tanks, but to be honest, we're always open. If you have me or Chris or Jay even on Google Plus or anywhere else, just give us a bell and go, I think I've got an idea. We're always happy to listen to things like that. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week for the 66 Think Tank.
Bye.